Welcome to the Writer Reads Short Stories. This is Rogue Retrieval, Part 1. The last person I expected to see when I stepped into the restaurant with the first meals of the night was Mac. Yet there he was, large as life and twice as mean. When I caught sight of his 7 foot something figure leaning against the wall just inside the entrance, it was all I could do not to drop what I was carrying and bolt for the alley out back. He was waiting for something, and somehow I didn't think it was for the concierge to check the bookings in case there was a free table. The way his eyes moved over the patrons enjoying their meals, he was looking for something else. Given I'd jumped ship 3 months back and he'd have been trying to find me ever since, it wasn't hard to work out what. Despite the sudden spike of adrenaline that sent a tremor running through my hands, I kept it all together, making my head think thoughts of who was getting what meal and how fast as I went through my implant looking for intruders. Not that I relaxed when I didn't find any. Mac might have discovered some new tricks since the last time. Him or Tens. It was hard not to search the room for the communications engineer, but I managed it. I even kept my pace to the level of efficient waitress, and not the equivalent of scared rabbit, until I was back through the door to the kitchen. Chief! I called, as soon as the door had swung shut behind me. Chief! I'd stripped off my apron and the cute little weight cap we all wore and headed for the door, dropping by the small office connecting to the kitchen before I left. I'm sorry, but something's come up. I've got to. Can't say the sudden grip around my bicep or the blaster muzzle pressed hard into my temple came as a complete surprise, but I'd been hopeful. Chief looked up from where he was counting out my wages. He started stuffing them into an envelope as he rose from his seat, and I wondered how he expected to give them to me. Instead, he offered them to someone standing just out of sight round a filing cabinet. Man, I hated his office. I always had, right from when he took me on to now. Next time I was going to walk if I didn't like the boss's office. If there was a next time. I hated the office a lot more when Delight stepped into view, taking the envelope from Chief's fingers as she came. Thanks, Chief. Odyssey appreciates your understanding in the matter. Odyssey, which meant I shifted my gaze as best I could without turning my head. I really needed to see who had hold of my arm. It was both a relief and not when Pritchard came through the door behind me, the look on his face melting into relief when he saw me. Nice work, he said, although I thought it was anything but. 10 slid into my head like he'd never left it. Boy had learned new tricks. What are you calling a boy? He said, his grip tightening on my arm, and I was tempted to try kicking his ass right then and there. Go ahead and make my day, he challenged. But the light was closing, and the blaster was still pressed against my skull, and I didn't dare move an inch. At least Chief didn't look like he was enjoying the show. He watched us, his eyes wide with horror, and even I could see the wheels of speculation starting to turn inside his head. Tens and Delight were treating me like the dangerous piece of work I could be, and there were reasons he never looked too deep into his employees' CVs. Thanks for the chance, Chief. Some other time, maybe. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he sat back down, his ass landing heavily enough to make his chair creak in protest. Maybe, he managed, but from the dry croak in his voice, I figured that was a maybe not. Well, damn. Mac and Delight had just ruined my day. Again. I wondered what they wanted this time. I'd skipped off the Shady Marie about 3 worlds back, leaving Mac and Tens another one of my fuck you very much it's been nice knowing you notes on the ship's system, and I'd wrapped it in just a tiny bit of virus to stop them following me as soon as they found it. I'd still had to skip out on Mac because the man was just that fast. 3 worlds and 3 months. It was the longest I'd managed yet, and I figured I'd done pretty well. Yeah, laugh it up, short stuff, Delight said, and I realized I wasn't alone with my thoughts. That the 4 of them were back inside my implant, and I hadn't noticed a single one of them arrive. Pritchard looped his arm through mine, and Tens shifted the blaster away from my head and down to my ribs, like that was any better. But together we wound our way out back, leaving through the kitchen like nothing was wrong. I wondered if any of the chefs would begrudge me the nearest meat cleaver, and Delight poked me in the back. Not a chance, kiddo. Kiddo, like I was anywhere near a child. I tensed up as we got close to the door and felt both Tens and Pritchard tighten their respective holds. Pritchard startled me by speaking. You know what? He said as Tens opened the door. He continued before I could reply. Let's not play this game. And he slammed an auto-injector into my ribs and kept it there until we'd moved into the alley behind the restaurant. by which time the injector had offloaded its contents. Cold lanced up over my skin and my knees gave. I fought the dark long enough to see Mac come round the restaurant's rear corner. Truly? He asked, taking one look at me and turning to Pritchard. But Pritchard's reply was lost to me. I could imagine what it was, though. It was probably along the lines of, I decided I was too old for this shit, so I decided to get it over and done with, or something like that. What did I care? I was out for the count. Mac was sitting beside the bed when I came round. He was always sitting beside the bed when I came round. Or in front of the tank. The stars knew why, but he'd made a habit of it, and I didn't see it stopping any time soon, more's the pity. You're just lucky Tens grabbed you first, he said, as the world swam into focus around me. Real lucky, he added, grabbing me and holding a bucket in front of my face as I sat up and threw up in one unceremonious movement. Why can't you just apply for leave like everyone else? Don't want to come back, I told him in between heaves. Wouldn't be very honest. He sighed. Well, seeing as you and me have an agreement about that, it doesn't matter. I sighed. By agreement, he meant he'd come and get me whenever I snuck off the ship and he needed me. At least I think that's what he meant. Something like that, he muttered and handed me a glass of water. You done? I didn't know, so I didn't bother answering, just took the glass and took a cautious sip. When that didn't come back up, I took a bigger sip and then a swallow. It was nice when everything stayed down. So, what do you need me for? Little girl didn't make it home from school and her mommy's running a mining conglomerate on a world Bluebirds thinks it should have. Bluebirds? Company that makes a habit of hostile takeovers and slave labor. Delight hates it with a passion. Your help is required. Don't know anything about little kids, I protested, but he had a reply all set to go. But you do know how to get things back from folk that shouldn't have them. The fact it's a kid shouldn't matter. Why can't Delight do it herself? I asked, and even to me I sounded whiny. Delight and Pritchard have bigger fish to fry. The girl is kind of a distraction, but one that needs to be dealt with. And it has to be me. I need you to deal with it. I made the dad a promise. I felt a spike of interest. He had? And just who was the dad for Mac to be making promises to? Because a promise didn't sound like we were getting paid. He made a sound of disgust. Odyssey's paying us, and I put the price up just a bit so we could yank Delight's chain. His voice took on a wheedling note. There's an early completion bonus. Okay, so now he had my attention. We were yanking Delight's chain, and there was an early completion bonus. I could use the extra cash, especially since Delight hadn't handed over my pay packet yet. She hasn't, and now Mac seemed more than a little bit annoyed. I'll speak to her about it. He would? My heart skipped a beat, and part of me forgot we were supposed to be annoyed with him. He held out his hand, and I passed him back the glass. Get dressed, he said, waving the glass in the general direction of my wardrobe, which was about when I realized I'd woken up in my personal quarters. I don't suppose you'd, I began, but he stopped at the door, leaning on it as he shook his head. You know the drill. I sure as shit did. He and Tans would keep a very close eye on me for about the next 24, and when they were sure I was committed to the mission, they'd ease up. Once the mission was over, however, I huffed out a sigh. Isn't Tens keeping tabs on me on the cams? And just like that, I was whining again. Mac wasn't impressed. Quit your bitching, he said. You didn't run off so often, we wouldn't have to watch you so close. Well, damn. I stalked over to the closet as best my wobbly legs could take me, slammed open the door as best I could slam a door that just wasn't designed for it, and pulled out the lower drawer. It was a relief to see Mac had remembered the armoured underwear, and there was another pair of boots. Probably because he hadn't been sure what I'd be wearing when they made their grab. It wasn't like we'd gone back to the flat for my gear. Your duffel's in stores. I'll have Stepien send it up when the mission's done. Okay, then. I took a closer look at the boots and realized they were brand spanking new, and even better than the last pair. Pleasure curled through me, and I did my best to hide my smile. Honestly, the man was. What? He asked, and I shut down that line of thought and focused on the rest of what I had to wear. I swear that man could smirk the loudest of anyone I knew because I could hear it clear across the room, even though it didn't make a sound. There was nothing I could do about the happiness that rose every time I saw the boots, but, to my surprise, neither Mac nor Tens had anything to say about that. I wondered if Mac would tell me where he'd found this pair, but he didn't say a word. I got dressed, ignoring the man by the door, and when I was done, right down to my nice new boots, he led the way out of the room. "We're in briefing room 9," he said, disposing of the bucket on the way. My heart sank. I'd been hoping there'd be time to hit the cafeteria on the way through. "And it's Odyssey's turn to bring snacks." I groaned. Delight had about as much catering sense as a water buffalo on the rampage. And Pritchard, well, who knew what that man thought was a good offering for an inter-team briefing? Turns out he knew a darn sight more than Delight. "We should get you to bring more snacks more often," Ten said, so I didn't have to, which was a good thing since the first thing Pritchard did as I walked through the door was hand me a bowl of something creamy, savoury, and oh, the stars. I'd have asked him if he was married, but I was too busy stuffing my face. He caught the thought, though, and his lips gave the briefest twitch, which, for Pritchard, was as good as a broad smile. His response had me rolling my eyes. I figured there had to be some way to shut her up while the grown-ups talked. Grown-ups, eh? I raised an eyebrow as I took a seat between Mac and Tens, and decided it was a good thing Pritchard was already taken when he set a warm bread roll on the plate beside me. Who cared why he'd done that? I was damned hungry. That pay packet had been supposed to cover the almost overdue rent and enough food for the next week. How Chief had thought anyone could live on those wages was anyone's guess, but I'd needed a place to get settled while I dodged my past, and he'd been the first one to hire me. And I'd kind of reached that point in my running away that I needed to stop and find more funds. Figures Mac would catch up with me just when I was getting comfortable. At least I got to you first. Yeah, man had a point. It could have been Delight. Or worse. There were worse? There's always worse. And they'd found out you were on World. Well, that couldn't have been good. It. It's a discussion for another time, Delight snapped, and she sounded more than put out. Max shrugged, but he didn't finish what he'd been about to say. I scraped my spoon through an empty bowl and then used the bread roll to mop up what was left. Catering was one of the few good things I remembered about Odyssey. That thought earned me a glare from both Pritchard and Delight, but it didn't stop Pritchard from replacing my bowl with a plate of pastries. "Still trying to keep me quiet, huh?" I asked, picking up one of the ones on the top, and I wondered when the grown-ups would get around to discussing their mission instead of me. "Kid's got a point," Delight said, and they got right down to business. "They've taken her up onto the orbital," Delight said, "so now they've got more than just a child as hostage.